Robert Boone never expected to find a woman hanging from his cabin's roof, her body swaying gently, barely clinging to life, with the words "Apache lover" burned cruelly into the door beneath her. It was a cold, late summer morning in 1878, deep in the Wyoming mountains where pine trees stretched endlessly against a sharp blue sky. The air was crisp with the scent of pine needles and distant smoke, and the rugged terrain pressed in around Robert's weathered cabin, a shelter he had claimed long ago to escape a world that had taken everything from him. Once a soldier haunted by the violent loss of his wife and child during the war, Robert lived in solitude, carrying his grief like a shadow that never lifted. The mountain's silence was broken now by this desperate scene, this fragile blonde woman, her breaths shallow and uneven, left to die beneath a mark of hatred. The burned door, the woman's faint breathing, and the unseen threat lurking beyond the trees cast a heavy weight over the quiet wilderness. The mountain held its secrets, but Robert knew this was no accident. It was a call to face the past he had tried to bury. If you love tales of grit, redemption, and love that lasts, subscribe to Dust and Destiny now and ride with us to the very end. Robert's hand instinctively went to the pistol at his hip, a reflex born from years of fighting and survival. But as he drew closer to the fragile figure hanging from the roof, the cold steel felt heavier in his grasp. Something deep inside told him this was not a threat to be met with violence. The woman was barely alive, her chest rising and falling in shallow, uneven breaths, and killing her would have been a final cruelty he could not commit. So he lowered his gun and steadied himself against the sharp ache in his muscles, unused to tenderness. With careful resolve, Robert reached up and lifted Annabeth from her grim perch. She was light, almost fragile as a wounded bird, her golden hair tangled and matted with dirt and dried blood. He slung her over his shoulder, feeling her pulse flutter faintly against his back like the last flicker of a dying flame. Each step down the slope was deliberate, the forest floor uneven beneath his boots, branches brushing at his coat as if urging haste. They reached a hidden lean-to by a cold, clear stream where Robert kept supplies for emergencies. He laid her gently on a bed of furs and blankets, the soft rustle contrasting with the harshness of her injuries. The air was still except for her ragged breathing and the distant call of a hawk circling overhead. Robert knelt beside her, cupping cool water in his hands to bathe the dirt and blood from her face. Her skin burned with fever, and despite exhaustion, her eyes fluttered open only briefly before closing again. Annabeth's dreams were restless, haunted by shadows that chased her even in sleep. At times, she cried out in terror, clawing at the invisible chains that bound her to the past. Robert sat quietly nearby, watching over her with a steady gaze. When she stirred awake in panic, flailing and desperate to escape, he grasped her wrists gently but firmly, his voice low and calm. "You're safe now. You're not there anymore," he assured her. Her eyes, wild with fear and disbelief, searched his face. She did not trust easily, and Robert knew the scars on her heart ran deeper than any burn on her skin. "Who are you?" she asked, voice cracked and wary. "Name's Robert. This place is mine, or what's left of it," he replied simply. Annabeth hesitated, then whispered her name. "Annabeth Cawley." Robert's jaw tightened at the name, a ghost from his past. Once he had fought alongside men who answered to Nathaniel Cowley, a man known for ruthless campaigns against the Apache. But this woman before him was no enemy. She was a survivor marked by pain and hatred. As Annabeth told her story of a brutal father, forbidden love, and a violent escape, Robert listened without judgment. His past was stained with violence and loss, but now he chose a different path. No longer a soldier bent on destruction, he became her protector, a man breaking from old orders to defend a fragile hope. The night settled around the cabin, thick with pine-scented silence broken only by the crackling fire. Robert's hands, once trained to pull triggers, now moved to soothe and heal. With every careful touch, he mended not only her wounds, but the fragile trust beginning to grow between them. In this wild, unforgiving land, two broken souls found the first fragile thread of something like salvation. Under the soft glow of the morning sun filtering through tall pines, Annabeth lay curled on the rough blankets. her breathing steadier, but her eyes heavy with memories she could no longer hide. The cabin felt both a sanctuary and a cage, holding secrets too painful to speak aloud. Slowly, as the hours passed, she began to peel back the layers of silence. "I'm the daughter of Nathaniel Coley," she said at last, voice barely above a whisper. "A man as cruel as the land is harsh. He ruled his plantation with an iron fist and a heart colder than winter." Her gaze drifted toward the window, where distant mountains stood like silent sentinels. "I loved a man, an Apache named Toma. That love was poison to my father. He called me a traitor, a witch. When he found out, he beat me, branded me with fire, then sent men after us both." Robert sat across from her, the weight of her words settling between them. His mind traveled back 15 years, to a night filled with smoke and screams that still haunted his dreams. He remembered the small village he was ordered to attack, a place where women and children had lived in fragile peace. The fire had been set high, too high, and the cries of those caught in the flames echoed like ghosts in his ears. Among the ashes he had found his wife and daughter, both lost to a bullet that was never meant for them. He clenched his fists, his voice rough as he spoke. "I stood there, watching the fire take them, feeling the weight of every order I'd obeyed." He looked away, eyes misting with memories he seldom shared. "I promised myself I'd never be part of that again." The silence that followed was thick but not uncomfortable. Instead, it was the quiet of two souls beginning to understand one another's pain. Days slipped by as they worked side by side, rebuilding the shattered remnants of the cabin. Robert cleared fallen branches and hammered loose boards, while Annabeth planted seeds she hoped would grow into more than food, potatoes, wild onions, and thyme sprouting stubbornly from the rocky soil. The routine offered a balm, a rhythm that spoke louder than words. In those quiet moments, their eyes met across the fire pit, brief glances that carried weight beyond speech. Annabeth would catch Robert watching her with a tenderness that surprised her. She began to lower the walls built from years of fear and pain, allowing small smiles to flicker like fragile embers. Robert, in turn, found comfort in her presence, a reminder that healing might be possible even in the shadow of loss. At night, the scent of pine smoke curled through the cabin as the fire crackled, throwing dancing shadows on the walls. From outside came the distant crack of gunfire, a stark reminder that peace was still fragile. Together, they listened to the sounds of the wilderness and the ghosts of their pasts, the line between them growing thinner. One evening, as Robert passed her a cup of cool water, Annabeth's hand brushed his briefly. A simple touch, but enough to ignite a spark neither dared to name. A sudden memory flickered in Robert's mind. A blurred face in a crowd, a fleeting glance on a dusty road years before. Had their paths crossed once, long ago? The thought lingered, adding a thread of tension to their growing bond. Both survivors of violence and betrayal, Robert and Annabeth were learning that trust could be forged not only in words but in shared silence, in steady hands, and in moments of quiet understanding. The past was still with them, but in the present, they found something new, a fragile hope kindling slowly amid the ruins. As the evening shadows deepened and the fire's warm glow flickered against the cabin walls, Annabeth sat close to the hearth, the weight of years pressing heavily on her shoulders. For days, she had hidden beneath a threadbare veil, a shield against the world's harsh gaze and the memories that threatened to consume her. But tonight, something in the quiet between them compelled her to unveil more than just her face. Slowly, with trembling hands, she pulled back the fabric, revealing skin marked by pain and defiance. Long, twisted scars ran across her back, raised and raw, the cruel legacy not of Apache weapons, but of white hands, she said bitterly. Hands that had branded her, beaten her, tried to erase her very existence. Her voice was fragile, trembling with memories that still cut deep. They called me witch, traitor, Apache lover, words meant to strip away who I am. They left me to die, hanging, burned, abandoned. She swallowed hard, eyes fierce despite the exhaustion. But I survived. I am still here. Robert listened without interruption or judgment. The weight of her story settled over him like the mountain mist outside. Thick, cold, yet undeniable. He understood better than most the scars that war and hatred left on a soul. His own hands, once instruments of destruction, now rested calmly on his knees. "You're more than the pain they tried to carve into you," Robert said softly. "More than the names they gave you. I don't hate you. I see your strength, the courage it takes to love when the world says you shouldn't." His eyes met hers, steady and sure. Loving across a line drawn in blood and fear, that's not betrayal, that's bravery. The fire crackled between them, its light casting long shadows that danced like ghosts of the past. For a moment, silence wrapped around them, a fragile peace born from shared wounds and understanding. Annabeth leaned slightly closer, the veil of mistrust beginning to lift. "I've spent so long running, from my father, from the men who hunted me, from myself," she confessed. "But here with you, I'm learning what it means to stand still, to be seen, to be valued." Robert nodded, the rough edges of his weathered face softening. "We carry scars," he admitted, "but those scars don't have to define us. They can remind us of what we've survived, and who we choose to be." As the evening deepened, the cabin grew quiet, except for the gentle crackling of the fire. Annabeth sat close to the hearth, her eyes reflecting the dancing flames, flickering with memories she had long tried to keep buried. For days, she had worn a thin veil, a fragile barrier against the eyes of the world, and perhaps against her own painful past. But tonight, the weight of silence pressed too heavily, and with trembling fingers, she began to lift the fabric that had hidden more than just her face. Slowly, she revealed the scars that traced across her back, long, twisted, raised wounds that told a brutal story. These marks were not the trophies of battle with Apache warriors, as some might assume, but the cruel brandings inflicted by white hands, by those who claimed to save her from sin, but instead sought to erase her very existence. Her voice, fragile yet resolute, carried the pain and defiance she had carried for years. "They called me a witch, a traitor, Apache lover. Words meant to strip me of my name, my honor, my life. They branded me to remind everyone of my supposed shame. They left me hanging, burned, abandoned to die." Robert watched quietly, the firelight revealing the lines of sorrow and strength etched on her face. He recognized in her scars the physical manifestation of a hatred he knew all too well. Not the kind born from battle, but the kind that festers in fear and prejudice. His own hands, once quick to draw a gun, now rested calmly, steady and unjudging. He saw beyond the scars to the woman who had survived them. "You're not what they say you are," Robert said softly, voice rough with sincerity. "Those marks don't define you. I don't hate you. I see your strength, your courage to love when the world demands hate. That kind of love, across a line drawn with blood and fear, is not betrayal. It's bravery." Annabeth's eyes searched his, searching for the truth in his words, hesitant yet desperate to believe. The fire's glow softened the edges of the past, casting long shadows on the cabin walls like silent witnesses to their shared pain. For a moment, silence wrapped around them, a fragile peace settling between two broken souls. "I've spent so long running," she whispered, voice thick with years of fear and exhaustion. "Running from my father's rage, from the men who hunted me, from the part of myself I thought was cursed. But here, with you, I'm learning what it means to stand still, to be seen, to be more than a mark or a story whispered in hate." Robert nodded, the roughness of his weathered face softening with understanding. "We all carry scars," he said quietly. "But those scars don't have to chain us. They remind us of what we survived and who we want to become." The warmth between them grew, not just from the fire, but from the trust beginning to bloom. Words came slowly, stories unfolded in low tones, weaving a fragile tapestry of hope where once there had been only fear. This connection, born in pain, began to root itself in something deeper, a quiet promise that healing was possible, and that freedom was not just a dream. Outside, the mountain air whispered through the pine trees, carrying away the echoes of hatred and violence. Inside the cabin, beneath the amber glow of the dying embers, Robert and Annabeth found a new truth: that love born from courage could break chains, heal wounds, and kindle a light strong enough to pierce even the darkest night. Under a sky brushed with soft morning light, Robert set to work repairing the cabin door, the very one that bore the hateful brand of Apache lover. Each stroke of his hammer was deliberate, a quiet act of defiance against the cruelty etched into the wood. The door had been shattered and charred, but with every nail he drove, it grew stronger, a symbol not just of shelter, but of survival and new beginnings. Nearby, Annabeth knelt in the rocky soil, her hands tenderly planting seeds: potatoes, wild onions, and sprigs of thyme. These small sprouts pushed through the dirt stubbornly, promising life where once there was only barrenness. The garden was more than food. It was a testament to hope taking root amid hardship, a daily reminder that growth was possible even after the harshest winters. One afternoon, Robert presented Annabeth with a simple keepsake, a scarf woven from soft, worn fabric he'd found among his few belongings. It wasn't expensive or ornate, but it carried weight. "This is for you," he said, his voice steady but gentle. "Not to hide behind, but to hold on to, something that belongs to you alone." Annabeth took the scarf, fingers tracing its threadbare edges. For the first time in years, she didn't fold it to conceal her scars, but wore it openly around her neck. The fabric was a small shield, a tangible symbol of dignity and agency reclaimed. Her eyes gleamed with quiet pride, no longer shadowed by shame or fear. Sitting by the fire that evening, they shared stories under the fading light. The past still lingered, but it no longer defined them. Robert reached out, resting a hand lightly on Annabeth's arm. "Love," he said slowly, "isn't proven by how loud you shout or how far you run. It's proven by how long you stay when the fire's gone out and the nights are quiet." Annabeth nodded, a soft smile breaking through. In that simple truth, they found strength, not just in surviving the past, but in choosing to face the future together. Their shared existence, fragile but steadfast, was a new kind of freedom, one built on trust, courage, and the healing power of love. Outside, the wind whispered through the pines, carrying the promise of spring and renewal. Inside, two souls once broken by war and hatred were weaving a life stitched together by hope, resilience, and a love that refused to fade. The fragile peace Robert and Annabeth had carved out in the Wyoming wilderness was shattered long before the sun slipped below the horizon one restless evening. Word came riding in on the wind, whispered in hushed voices, and carried through towns like wildfire. Clayton Reich was gathering men. Not just any men, but a posse of ruthless hunters, mercenaries thirsty for blood, and men who answered no law except the one carved by hatred and vengeance. Their mission was clear: find the Apache lover who dared survive and end her story forever. Robert had heard the warnings from a local man who stood nervously at his cabin door, hat in hand, voice low with unease. "There's a bounty, Boone," the man said, eyes flicking toward the forest line. "Coins and cattle for her head, dead or alive. They're coming fast and they won't show mercy." The weight of those words settled cold and heavy in Robert's chest. This was no longer a battle to protect a fragile life from the elements or loneliness. It was a war reignited, born from the same fire of old hatred that had taken so much from them both. Determined to shield Annabeth from the storm, Robert set to work with the quiet cunning of a man who knew every rock and tree on those slopes. He crafted a silent defense, not with bullets and bloodshed, but with traps and warnings. Strings of broken glass and sharp tin cans were strung like invisible alarm wires along the ridge and around the cabin. Branches were rigged to snap beneath unsuspecting feet, sending sharp, sudden noises into the still air. Signals meant to buy precious seconds and slow their pursuers. His weapons remained untouched, not out of fear or weakness, but because Robert sought to protect without unnecessary killing. He had learned, through hard and bitter lessons, that violence left scars far deeper than any wound. But the hunters came with the fury of the hunted. As dusk bled into night, the pounding of hooves echoed through the foothills like thunder, shaking the earth beneath their feet. The sharp bark of gunfire shattered the mountain silence, bullets ripping through the trees and stirring panic in the forest's creatures. Robert moved like a shadow, silent and swift, a ghost among the pines. His hands struck with precise, practiced force, an elbow to a throat, a twist of a wrist, enough to disable and disarm but not to kill. Each movement was a desperate dance, a man fighting not for glory but to protect what he had come to hold sacred. At the forest's edge, Annabeth's figure was lit by the flickering glow of fire she had set alight. Sweat slicked her damp hair to her forehead, her dress singed and clinging to her frame. She held a burning branch like a sword, eyes blazing with fierce determination and raw survival instinct. The wildfire she ignited roared to life, a golden beast tearing through the dry underbrush with relentless hunger. Smoke billowed and curled, choking and blinding the posse as they stumbled, their curses lost in the roar of the flames. The heat was oppressive, pressing down like the weight of years spent running and hiding. Robert seized the chaos as his chance. He struck hard, breaking a man's leg and dragging another into the dirt, before retreating with Annabeth toward a narrow ravine. They ran through choking smoke and falling ash, lungs burning and hearts pounding, until they reached an old cave nestled deep in the canyon wall, a shelter Robert had once used during winter patrols. Inside the cool darkness, they collapsed, bodies battered, skin smudged with soot and sweat. The silence was a balm, but the fight was far from over. Annabeth's voice was a rough whisper in the gloom. "I set the woods on fire," she admitted, a faint smile breaking through her exhaustion. Robert brushed a singed lock of hair from her face and asked softly, "Would you have died for me?" "No," she breathed. "I want to live. For you." They lay side by side, breath heavy in the cool cave air, knowing their victory was temporary. The danger beyond the canyon still loomed, a shadow cast long and dark. But in each other's presence they found a flicker of hope, a reason to face whatever storms might come. As dawn crept over the ridge, spilling soft gold light through the cave's mouth, Robert and Annabeth sat together in quiet determination. Outside, the forest stirred, alive with possibility and peril. The road ahead was uncertain and treacherous, but united by shared struggle and newfound trust, they were ready to meet it head-on. In the wilderness where love had once been a forbidden flame, now burned a fire of resilience and courage, a blaze neither hatred nor fear could extinguish. The sun hung low over Dustwater as Robert and Annabeth rode into town, their faces set with determination. The weight of the past pressed heavily upon them, but so did the hope that truth might finally break through the long silence. Their mission was clear: to bring justice not through gunfire or bloodshed, but with proof, letters, church records, and sworn testimony that exposed the brutal hatred behind Clayton Reich's campaign of violence. Days before, in the dim light of a dusty parlor behind the old chapel, Robert had uncovered the half-charred drafts of letters, threatening notes penned by Reich himself to Annabeth's father, filled with venomous warnings and slurs. The church's ledgers confirmed land donations made by the Cowboy family, documents stained with the same fiery handwriting that branded the cabin door where Annabeth had nearly died. With these in hand, Robert and Annabeth sought out the town's leaders. The courthouse steps, once a place of quiet order, now thrummed with tension as curious townsfolk gathered, drawn by rumors and the promise of confrontation. Robert laid the evidence before the mayor and a panel of elders, his voice steady as he recounted the story that had haunted the mountains for years. "This," Robert said, holding up the scorched piece of leather, "was nailed to a cabin where a woman was left to die. The handwriting matches letters threatening her family, letters written by Clayton Reich." A murmur rippled through the crowd, unease settling in like a cold wind. Then came the testimony that would shake Dustwater to its core. An old man, bent and white-bearded, stepped forward with a wooden cane. He introduced himself as the field surgeon who had served during the militia raid on the Apache settlement years ago. His voice, though worn by time, carried the weight of truth. "I was there the night we burned that village," he said quietly. "No quarter was given. Men, women, children, many died because of orders from men like Reich. I buried my guilt with silence for years, but the truth will not stay buried. Clayton Reich stood nearby, arms crossed, dismissing the accusations as war stories from a recluse and a woman who betrayed her bloodline. But the surgeon's words cut through the denials, leaving an uneasy silence. At that moment, Annabeth stepped forward, the veil of shame finally cast aside. She reached behind and untied the back of her blouse, revealing long, twisted scars raised like ropes and raw around the edges. Gasps rippled through the crowd. "These wounds," she said, voice steady despite the room's stunned silence, "were not made by Apache blades. They were given to me by white hands, men who claimed to save me from sin, but only brought pain." Her courage was a mirror to the community's conscience, forcing Dustwater to confront its dark past. Clayton Reich's power waned under the weight of truth. He was condemned, not with cheers or fanfare, but with solemn judgment and quiet justice. The townsfolk lowered their heads, many grappling with guilt and denial. The fire of hatred had been challenged, its smoke beginning to clear. Robert and Annabeth stood together, witnesses not only to survival, but to the first steps toward healing. As the sun set beyond the dusty streets, a hush fell over Dustwater, a moment of relief, fragile and profound. Justice had not come swiftly nor easily, but it had come, beneath the pale light of the early dawn, before the town of Dustwater had stirred awake. Robert and Annabeth slipped away quietly. The streets, still cloaked in shadow and silence, bore witness to their departure, not with fanfare or farewell, but with the soft, steady footsteps of those who sought a new beginning. The weight of the past hung lightly behind them, but ahead lay the wild Wyoming mountains, vast, untamed, and full of promise. Their journey back was slow and deliberate, the rough terrain familiar beneath their boots and hooves. As the sun rose behind jagged peaks, the air filled with the sharp scent of pine and earth. Here, far from the judgments and scars of Dustwater, they found a land that did not demand they be anything other than themselves. The mountains whispered a welcome only the brave and the broken could hear. Once back at the rugged cabin nestled among towering pines and granite cliffs, Robert and Annabeth set to work rebuilding more than just walls. With calloused hands and hearts still healing, they repaired the shelter, its door fresh with new blue ash paint, a symbol of peace rather than hatred. Around the cabin, they planted gardens of wildflowers, beans, squash, and herbs, each sprout a quiet rebellion against the bitterness of the past. Word soon traveled through the mountain winds, carried by travelers and whispered by those who had suffered prejudice and exile. One by one, others found their way to Robert and Annabeth's refuge. A boy cast out for marrying a Cheyenne woman, a woman bearing scars of her own battles, and even a wounded horse limping from a careless hunter's bullet. This was no longer a place of exile, but of return, a sanctuary where broken souls could heal and find belonging. In the evenings, as the sun dipped behind the ridgeline, painting the sky in shades of red and gold, Robert would walk the worn path to find Annabeth standing by the split-rail fence. There was no ring, no preacher, no grand declaration, only the quiet truth between them. "You don't need to say yes," Robert murmured one night, dust clinging to his boots and hat in hand. "I just need to know you'll be here when the sun falls behind that tree, and the next night after that." Annabeth stepped closer, hands resting lightly on his shirt, her eyes reflecting the firelight. "Dua was my first storm," she said softly. "He broke the locks on my cage and taught me fire." Her voice trembled slightly as she added, "But you taught me stillness. That love doesn't have to be lightning to be real. It can be the sound of wood creaking under moonlight, the scent of smoke on flannel." Robert said nothing, closing his eyes and resting his forehead gently against hers. "Tomorrow is memory. You are tomorrow," she whispered. Their love was not written in laws or recorded in history books, but it lived in the quiet moments, the steady flame in the hearth, the wind rustling through the pines, the wildflowers blooming every spring. It was a love proven not by grand gestures, but by endurance and presence, by choosing to stay when the fire had burned low and the night stretched long and silent. Months later, a letter was found tucked inside the pages of a donated book at the Dustwater schoolhouse. The handwriting was elegant and steady, no signature attached. It read, "I was once loved by a warrior who held my heart like a blade, fierce, bright, and sharp, carrying the weight of 1,000 battles. Now I live with a man who holds my heart like soil, soft, steady, and strong enough to plant something new. Poop taught me how to fight. The other taught me how to stay. I have learned that love is not proven by how loud you shout or how far you run. It is proven by how long you stay when the fire is out and the nights are quiet. He is not my captor. He is not my savior. He is simply the one who stayed. And that is enough." In the heart of a land carved by wind and fire, two souls, once broken by war, blood, and loss, found something they never thought possible. Not just survival, but peace. Not just memory, but a reason to stay. The past does not disappear. It lingers like the scent of wildflowers carried on a mountain breeze. But how we carry it, whether as chains or as lessons, defines who we are. If stories like this stir your soul, subscribe now, share it with a friend, and tell us your thoughts in the comments.